Okay, can anyone hear me? Let's see if we are live. Whoever is here, please type something and I could see whether or not the live stream is working. And if my mic is working. There's a bit of delay in the system. Oops. Let's see here. Why is my camera not showing? So I do have the chat in the right hand monitor. I got things going on there. I'm going to be showing you guys some stuff in Cubase. I figured in celebration, so yeah, I guess we'll kick it off. I'm celebrating the milestone of 5,000 subscribers, and I honestly didn't really think I'd ever reach that type of a goal. Now that it's here, it's kind of surreal. I'd like to celebrate by offering the same thing that I've been doing with all the videos, which is providing mixing advice, talking about different programs, like specifically with Cubase, and continue this stream as a Q&A all the way throughout. So I've chosen a session here. This is one of my songs that I worked on. It's off of a 3-song EP. I spent quite a bit of time writing, kind of producing what I was going to do with the 3 songs, and spent a lot of time recording, thinking about things, mixing, mastering, and overall, with roughly 15 minutes worth of music, it took me about a year to complete. And it's because I was being really, really meticulous all along the way. It's not like I wouldn't call it a great piece of music or anything, but I took all this time to focus my attention on improving everything that I've done in the past. So that includes recording in a higher quality. It includes just writing better music, which is it's always a bit of a hurdle, that one. But also mixing better than I've ever done with this type of music, and then spending a lot of time to getting the mastering to sound as best as possible. So I'm gonna walk through that, and I figured what I would start with this bad boy is to show you what it was at the beginning of the recording, so what I've done, and yeah, I want to walk through this stuff because each step or each sort of function of mixing has a drastic effect on what the end result sounds like. So I'm going to pull up. Just give me 1 second. I want to get the chat here. So as I mentioned, any questions along the way, feel free to ask me some questions. I'll answer them as we move along. I just want to make sure you guys are hearing me, because I do see, and maybe just comment on the quality of the stream, because I'm actually connected to an internet that's a little bit slower than I'm used to. So hopefully the upstream is decent. So recording, I think I would say 7 to 8 years now, actually properly experimenting and getting equipment and using a proper recording space of sorts. Um, I am a musician, yeah, and it definitely helps. The one thing it certainly helps with is um, is understanding like how instruments sound from an intrinsic level. Like when you've played the guitar for ages and ages, you hear that instrument for so many years that you have this natural tendency for what a guitar sounds like. And when you put a mic on it, you record it, let's say for the first few times, you're kind of endless or aimlessly sort of trying to get that sound that you hear. And at least having that foundation in your mind's eye, so to speak, of knowing what to shoot for, that's definitely a better start, and it definitely helps along the way. Yeah, so I think we're having a bit of streaming issues. But so I will start this bad boy off. So here it is, the project with all uh, the channel pre. What is this here? That's the notes. Get out of there. So all of the pre section, which I've done, is mostly low cut, high cut on all the channels that don't need lows and high frequencies. There's a whole ton of insert plugins on various different tracks, especially the vocals, and you'll hear that difference in a second here. The EQ, I mainly use plugins, and then we have the send effects, and last but not least is the panning. So I'm going to start by playing a completely raw representation of all this music. Here's just the drums. So very vanilla, quite plain sounding. The kick is poking through. I ended up doing 2 kick drum mics, 2 snare top and bottom, and then close mics on all the 3 toms. Overhead spaced pair, which worked out quite good. I also did directly on the hats and ride, and those are blended in just barely so that it adds a little bit of volume control in the recording, and so that I can EQ it a certain way to brighten the ride or the hats if I needed to in certain frequency areas. And then I also had a room mic which was a bit further away, and the thump mic which is on I think it was on the inside left or right of the drummer. So basically where the drummer hears the kick and the snare, that's kind of where the thump mic was. And it really did add a little bit of beefiness to the overall recording in a way. Let's see if we can hear that. So it's not very loud in the mix. But if you can hear, it definitely adds a little bit of that kick, sort of slappy thumpness to it, which is what I was trying to get in this recording. The bass guitar that was recorded DI. Oh crap. What's going on here? Okay, so I'll have to restart that. Technical troubles. That actually hasn't happened in a long time. I've never seen my computer do that, nor with Cubase. It's weird. What the fuck? What the fuck is going on? Oh boy. So, having some technical difficulties here. Gonna have to restart the session, just get everything set up again. Yeah, just give me a hot minute here, and I'll find everything. There's the camera. Perfect. Okay, so here's the project. There's some kind of funky stuff going on with my computer today. Let's pull up the mixer. And we're going to disable this. Yeah, for some reason, computer's not taking too kindly to all the things that I'm doing. I'm kind of assuming that is my video card acting up. Because I'm having trouble with my right monitor. So anyways, let's get back to business. I think I showed you the drum recordings. The bass was direct input. It sounded pretty decent. I think I borrowed a nice bass from a friend. Just recorded that. The guitars is actually the main thing that I did while producing. That was the main driving force, as I was writing music centered around the electric guitars. And in here you can hear it. Very Viking metal, stoner rock inspired, as far as riffs and everything. And what I did was I started with just scratch guitars to get the skeleton of the song. I figured out what the tempo of the song would be. I figured out that it changes here because this part is nice and lively and needs a lot of gusto. The intro part was nice and drawn out, so that was a lower BPM. So I added the BPM counters. I recorded the scratch guitar into it, and then I ended up recording a proper set of guitars. Here, let's... So these guitars... I was really not worried about how they sounded like. I just needed them to be recorded, and they sounded very like quote-unquote metal-esque and brittle and bright, which I don't really like in guitars. I like them to be nice and chunky. Sometimes they can have that brittle edge to it if it's a full-on metal song, but it just depends on what it is. I recorded that, and then I recorded the full guitars with my expensive PRS guitar and my Laney amp. I love the sound of those with the natural amp distortion. There you can hear it's not even really that distorted. There's a clean edge to it, and that's what I love, because when you stack all of that stuff and then you mix it with a bit of heat or overdrive or whatever, it just sounds so beefy and chunky, and that's what I was going for. But so when I did record this, I found that adding a little bit of this guitar created some, I don't know, just an extra little bit of almost like reverb and overdrive in a nice, pleasant way. And having more takes, because these are all individual takes. This is a total of 4 takes, and I plotted them so that they'd be 2 hard right and 2 hard left, and they'd all complement each other, and it's not playing the exact same thing. Here, the intro is playing one thing, and that's spread left and right. And then here, the intro on the other guitar is playing something different, and that's spread left and right as well. And you can see in different sections, sometimes they're playing the exact same thing, and that adds to the beefiness, and there's contrast in these sections. So I guess that's kind of production things, and then these together just adds that little bit of top end sparkle that I couldn't really get from EQing or adding overdrive and whatnot. Oh, thanks, Truth Trader. Yeah, so I ended up leaving that in the actual final product. I did do some editing on some of the guitars. Actually, I'll show you the editing also on the drums. So this is not the raw recording because there is different track versions. The original recording I actually sliced up using the group track function and the quantize, because I'm not the best session drummer or guitar player or whatnot, so I needed a little bit of help to keep everything nice and tight and professional sounding. So I ended up chopping up pretty much every hit point, regardless of whether it was on time or off time. Used quantize, and I would have used the iterative quantize. It looks like at 51% towards the grid, so that tightened everything up a little bit. And then because when you do that, there's so many different little pieces. You can see here the computer's kind of stuttering visually and is just kind of chugging and slow. I ended up bouncing down the audio so that it's nice and smooth again. And that's what the second version there is. Okay, then we get into, let's see here, extra guitar bits, which was the fun production part. So I ended up in the drop down section. There's this whole drop down section and then a build up. Into there. So actually without this, sort of a nice big comeback impact. And I wanted to experiment, and I ended up doing, I have these two outboard Boss digital delay rack units, and I ended up playing around with that just for a little while because I just got them, and there's a function on them where you can freeze the audio. And I believe what I did was I froze the audio, and then I ended up adding more feedback so that it was looping in on itself. So I ended up recording a kind of string bend. Oh no, that's not even a string bend. Here, I remember what it was. Or there you go. You can hear what it is, what it actually is at the tail end of this section. So that's all it is. It's just a down with like sort of string bend. And then I ended up delaying it with that digital delay, creating the sort of delayed effect of it, and then I ended up detuning and reverbing everything to the point where you can't really quite tell. And because it's two different delays, they're not perfectly in time, right? So you hear like on one end it's delaying and bending up, and then the other end, the left and the right signals is what I'm talking about. And on the other one it's kind of lower or higher. It's different. It sort of blurs and then comes into a focus. And that's what I kind of just envisioned it, tried it out on the delays and the reverbs and stuff, and it ended up working quite well. And then this guy, just for added impact, I wanted like a roar sound, almost like to come in and just be like super impactful. And I think it was, so I added an actual fake amp. So just like a kind of growly bit. And I recorded this after the fact, after I didn't have a proper room to record my amp in. So I was like, okay, just record a DI and then use an amp simulator, and it ended up being pretty decent. So let's move down, and then there's some synths, because the original production I had some synths in it, and these synths sort of added some effect at the intros and just a little bit of extra flavor in some of the sections. They're not really doing that much, but I added those in there. Vocals are probably the most drastically produced, or drastically, what would you call it, like mixed and whatnot. You can see all these different plugins. I cannot sing screaming for the life of me. I can sing like in a low tone, like a Frank Sinatra level of vocal range, and sort of in that way with like deep guttural reverberations and whatnot, and I can hit notes and comfortably, maybe not as good as a true vocalist. But yeah, this was like a one-man project too, where I wanted to do everything. So I was like, okay, fuck it, I'll try to learn some screaming. I'll see what I can do. And I think I had to do each song on a different day because it ruins my throat.
Now here we stand in Cedar Land, marching forth we hope to find the Guardian.
But see, there's a few different takes as far as like whatchamacallit, like different track versions. But this is actually probably 6 hours worth of different takes, one after the other, just to let's see if I have any of these left. Yeah, here we go. So there's still some in the lanes. These are the ones that I kept, and I just kept recording different potential scream, yelling vocals until I was like, okay, that's okay, and I would save different sections. Really sort of to hit a nerve on the throat, but I just kind of stuck through it. But anyways, these I wasn't really comfortable with, because again, I'm not a screaming vocalist. I'm not even a vocalist at all.
Now here we stand in Cedar Land.
And I felt that, okay, I'll EQ, I'll compress and DS and do whatever. And I was like,
marching forth we hope to find the Guardian.
Like, it's okay. I think this has it has a little bit of delay on it. So it's like, okay, I'll spruce it up with some delay.
Guardian, whom Baba roars.
It gets like that cool room effect. But I was like, you know what? This is like, it sounds so lame. And then I ended up using the Altar Boy, which changed the formant, and I can add some drive to it.
Rastering my sword, the beast is dead. I took its head, it breathes no more.
And I think it's actually adding a little bit of like chorusing effect almost, probably because there's two different pitch ranges, and because it's it's fully wet. Never mind. But when you change the format, it's doing some stuff like digital aliasing or whatnot, and you can kind of hear it sounds kind of like chorusing.
Now here we stand in Cedar Land, marching forth we...
It's way more like brutal, like way more metal. So I was like, holy shit. That was a good little experiment, and I'm going to keep that in memory for any time I'm mixing other people's music. Is like, there's quite a difference.
We hope to find the Guardian, whom Baba roars, rastering my sword.
Maybe my clients wouldn't quite prefer that, but experimenting with, formants, different pitch ranges, whatever the heck, can lead to some pleasing results. Now, okay, so that's kind of that. I wanted to show you completely blank without any any processing, and then we'll go step by step showing you just how much each step of the mixing process actually does. So this is completely mono, like nothing panned, nothing EQ'd, no high pass, low pass, no send effects, all that jazz. So it's not terrible. Definitely needs some work. With the panning alone as a huge one. So let's hear that.
Now here we stand in Cedar Land, marching forth we hope to find the guardian. Who by my roars, rise through my sword. The beast is dead, I took its head and please no more.
So I think it's most noticeable when the vocals are in. Nothing is really like stand out when there's no panning. I panned guitars hard left and hard right, and that's kind of a flavor thing. I think a lot of mixing engineers don't prefer that because it's too wide and it's unnatural sounding almost. But in this case, I think it works really well. The vocals are dead center, the kick drum, the snare dead center. All of that stuff actually has room to breathe and sounds, everything sounds kind of in their place, I think.
The beast is dead, I took its head and please no more. It's on, the battle's done.
The pre-section, I didn't do a heck of a lot, I don't think. Let's just have a scroll through and see what has... Oh yeah, okay, so the guitar trills stuff, the extra guitar bits have lots. Scratch guitars, get some of that high end to warm it up. Let's see, the room mics were too bright, too much nonsense. There's the phase flip on the thump mic because it was causing issues. I think that would be true on the snare bottom as well, which also got a nice heavy dose of low cut. Toms were cut a little, and overheads. So let's see without that.
Cedar, you're coming out, and now it's charred. She wants my seed. I turned her down, spit on her crown, and now she weeps. She set the ball to murder me. I thrust my dagger.
So without all those cuts, you can definitely hear it's kind of cloudy. It does sound a little bit more pleasant as far as the bass range goes, but that causes issues if you don't sort of clean it up. So I cut that out, and it definitely gave a lot more breathing room for, let's say, the kick drum, the actual main kick drum, when the other instruments that don't really need that low end, like the snare bottom, there's really nothing bass wise that's adding to the mix. That can be cut out almost immediately. The cymbals there's really nothing going on that I'm using that's under about 1K. I could add a little bit more chunkiness, but that chunkiness is already, I think, in the overheads. The overheads themselves, nice and clean, and have lots of present attack with each drum hit for the kicks, the snare, the toms, and everything. But it's really not capturing that full low end that I'm looking for, so that's cut out. That can be achieved with the combination of close mics for the snare and the kick drum. And then I also have that thump mic, which it's giving a nice, pleasing slap low end to the kick and to the snare too, actually. The room mic, I believe, it was only compressed. It was compressed with a huge, huge ratio, which is classic. We'll move on to the inserts.
Now here we stand in Cedar Land, marching forth we hope to find a guardian who by my roars, right through my sword. The beast is dead, I took its head and breathes no more. It's done, the battle's done. Cedar, you're coming home, and now it's your.
So obviously there's a lot of volume changes. It's not just mixing and EQing and whatever. There's quite a bit of volume adjustments due to the processing from the plugins. But one thing you can certainly notice is how clean the drums get. That's from using an expander. It's basically a gate but with like a ratio. But all of that stuff is cleaned up because the kick drum mic is not picking up the entire drum room sound. It's only coming in whenever there's a kick drum.
She was my seed. I turned her down, feet on her crown, and now she
And
weeps.
that's the gain reduction. So when the kick drum goes away, the gain reduction kicks in and then it cuts out any extra noise. And it's quite important, I think, for live drum recordings to use that some kind of technique of that sort. So let's see if we can pull up on the mixer. Yeah, all the expanders are in that range. Yeah, here we go. So without lots of extra ringing. That's mostly the toms, and there's loads of it. Like that sounds terrible. All that extra ringing. This. Like what a world of difference that makes. So especially for a metal style or Viking metal style, stoner rock style of song like this, usually these types of songs are triggered and then they play back samples that are like pristinely recorded. And so you're competing with that type of a sound. If you can simply use an expander or gate to your advantage and get that that quality of sample style sound, then you don't really need the samples per se. You can just like use what you have and just process it to the nines if you really needed to. Maybe trigger it and use some samples. That would be easier to achieve. But whatever. I don't really like that style. I like to have nice raw recordings that are just maybe over processed. I prefer that than triggering samples. I find that's kind of a cheating thing, and it becomes a little bit robotic in the end. So, anyways, that's the expanding. You can definitely hear that things are nice and tight as far as drum hits. So the compression is doing a fair amount of work. The EQ is doing a fair amount of work as well, because it's shaping rather precisely. So like in the 500 range on the kick drum, that is taking out some of that box. I'm going to have to unselect. So yeah, here you can see the difference big time. Like this is, it sounds nice, it's pleasing. But we're not looking for that sort of mid-range boxy sound. That is going to be, number one, it sounds weird, like boxy weird. It also is going to take up a lot of room where the guitars sit and where the vocals sit too, actually. So it's eating up space in the mix. It doesn't sound pleasant. We scoop it out, and you can get a much better, properly placed in the frequency spectrum, and just tighter sounding kick drum. And the compressor definitely helping shape transients and just keeping the level at a more, actually a less dynamic range. It's tightening it up in many different ways. Let's go to the snare drum. So here again, we got rather hefty amount of EQing. Typically, I'll send them to a group, the combine those two mic recordings to a group track and process it singularly on the group track. But here it's important to get the snare bottom, get those low frequencies out, and sort of make sure that it's doing what it's meant to do, because they rarely sound very good, the snare bottoms. They just add that like sprinkly top end, and so I didn't want to just throw it into the group and start EQing all together, because these two mics are quite different in what they're trying to achieve. So I get these, again, sort of the 500 boxiness out of there. It just cuts through a little bit better. Some of the low end is scooped out because it's a little bit too beefy. It just comes out, or it cuts through a lot better in the mix. And then this supercharger I love using on snares. For some reason, it just adds a whole new dimension to the snap of the snare. And you can add some coloration, and it has a built-in sort of punch function. So again, it's definitely adding some volume, but how it affects it, it's definitely like it's reshaping the transient to a huge extent, and it's dirtying the sound up a little bit with some overdrive and keeping it nice and punchy. And you can tell that the dynamic range has been has been dealt with. It's no longer a wide range of hits. So that's the snare, and the toms are compressed and EQ'd, and again quite severely in that boxy low end muddy section. 500 and 250 in almost every drum is either boxy or muddy sounding. So 100 hertz is usually that nice thumpiness. The lower 50-ish to 80 has a lot of like low end, hits you in the chest thump, which is good. 250 can have some slappiness, which is nice in certain cases. So like a kick drum, you might want to keep some of that in there. 500 on a kick drum tends to be the sweet spot for taking out that gross boxy sound. Toms, they can be quite muddy in this range, so I scooped that out. And I think most of these, I guess it just depends on which tom you're going for, and then what it is you're trying to achieve. So the small toms, 500, I think, is a little bit more. It's better, you know. The bigger the tom is, the more rumbly low end you want, and more thump, essentially, you're going to want to have. But I scooped out a lot of the mids in the higher, like the floor tom, for instance. Those were much better sounding with some cleanup like that. Let's try and find. Ooh. Yeah, they're the. You can definitely hear the top end of the small tom. I think the 1K 500 is actually helping it cut through. So anyways, let's move on here.
Inside the battle's done. See ya, you're coming home. And now it's dry. She wants my seed. I turned her down, feet on her crown, and now she weeps. She set the ball to murder me. I thrust my dagger in its neck, and now it bleeds.
So there you go. That's, I think, nice and cleaned up for one. The panning makes room for everything in the mix, regardless of their frequency range. The EQing sort of scoops out unneeded stuff and emphasizes stuff that's working for that particular track or instrument. The compression levels out some of the dynamic range throughout the song. It shapes the transients, usually in most cases, in a way that helps the instrument do what it needs to do. For instance, the snare needs to slap and crack, and that's why I use that supercharger on there. The kick drum, DB160, is very, very pleasing, has good thump effect for kick drums, as far as like the slappy fast attack that it has, or maybe it's a slow attack, I don't even know, but it's very pleasing to the sound of the kick drum and shapes the transient in a way that punches through. If I want something a little sloppier, I might go with a VC 76, so an 1176 style compressor, because that tends to emphasize not so much the transient shape, but it's great for basses, for instance, for the exact same reason, is it tends to sort of emphasize the release of something. You can definitely get some good attack out of it, but I find this plugin shines, or this style compressor shines, when you're trying to get, let's say, the rattly, beefy end of a snare. Instead of focusing on a nice cracking snare, you want something that's nice round body with lots of sizzle. This 1176 will do a great job. Now, having said all of this stuff, it's sounding clean, it's sounding quite proper, but it's too clean. It's not. There's really no sort of emotion behind the sounds, because there's no reverb, there's no delay, and whatnot, and it doesn't quite sound like it's recorded as a performance. It's kind of all it's sounding quite sterile. So with the send effects, again, you'll see quite a large difference. And the send effects I'm using are anything from parallel compression to reverb to delays and stuff.
To find the guardian who by my roars rush through my sword. The beast is dead, I took its head and breathes no more. Inside the battle's done.
Especially the vocals.
Cena, you're coming out, and now it's dry. She was my seed. I turned her down, spit on her crown, and now she weeps. She sent the bull to murder me. I thrust my dagger in its neck, and now it bleeds.
There's quite a bit of effect on the vocals.
Hope to find the guardian, whom Baba roars. I swing my sword. The beast is dead, I took its head, it breathes no more.
Yeah, there's just a lot more emotional impact when you have, let's say, a lead guitar that's delayed and reverbed out into space, you know? You're emphasizing the emotional impact that instrument has. I also tend to use parallel compression in almost all my mixes, and this helps with getting that glued together sound without over-compressing, without sacrificing transients and stuff. You can kind of just add it in there to add some extra flavor, as far as, you know, maybe in here, in this case, I'm actually pushing the input to an extreme where it's actually adding distortion, coloration to that signal. So I'm not only am I compressing a signal to make the overall RMS average levels a little bit louder and compressed sounding, I'm also adding some coloration that is quite pleasing to this style of music. It's meant to be kind of aggressive. So with and without.
Find the guardian, who by my roars, I swing my sword. The beast is dead, I took its head and breathes no more. Inside the battle's done.
Again, it's a little bit louder. You can't really level match this easily, but it is adding a little bit of that distorted coloration and aggressiveness to it. So I certainly reached for this style of processing for this song. And I think the drum plates really add something to the drums. Let's just have a quick listen to that. Because, yeah, the room that I recorded in is a decent size lengthwise. There's not really high ceilings, but trying to get more reverb sound from that room would just sound too small and boring. So I ended up recording one room mic just to get that effect, but then to get the full sort of drum reverb sound, I had to go with plugins. So that's like hall style reverb. And for this type of music, I think it works well. It's kind of too much when you solo it and when it's on its own, but with everything, I think it works quite well.
Cena, you're coming out, and now it's sure she wants my seed.
Because when the drums are up front like that, you can kind of tell it's too up front. I'm trying to go for like a marching drum band that's behind an entire army, like that sound. So having like a big open reverb sort of gives that effect. It has more of a marching big faraway crowd or something, you know. It's just sprinkled in there.
Cena, you're coming out, and now it's dry. She wants my seed. I turned her down, spit on her crown, and now she weeps. She set the ball to murder me.
I still wanted the punch to come through. Yeah, I think my stream is not doing so hot. I think it keeps cutting in and out. I have no idea what the quality of the audio or video is. But hopefully you guys are learning something from this little session. I felt it's one that I know quite intimately and can sort of work around and stuff. It's also, I think, one where it's easier to show the drastic changes along the way. If anyone has any questions, I can move on to other things. If the playback and stream quality is just terrible, then I might just call it a day. Because there seems to be... Oh, no, there's actually a decent amount of viewers now. So, another thing I can do is either focus more on Cubase things, or I can go into a current Bitwig session that I'm working on. It's a deep house tune, which I am about 70% finished on the production side. So anybody in the chat here, do you have a preference? So on the one hand, I can do more Cubase related things. It's easy when there's a question in the chat. I can just show a whole bunch of things. I can talk about my music background. I can talk about future plans. I can go into, like I mentioned, into Bitwig and show you a session that I'm currently working on. You can see kind of behind the hoods of what a song sounds like when it's 70% done and you're struggling to finish it. And then I could show you my sort of thought process and what I envision for the song. yeah, it does appear to me that the the stream quality, it seems to be cutting in and out quite heavily. Okay, so actually, you know what? I'm gonna just do a couple quick things. So number one, I guess this is part of what I was going to lead into, was showing some of the things. Number one is I was traveling Europe for just over 2 months. Now, obviously, I can't do all the things that I wanted to do as far as making videos, uh, working on people's projects, doing audio engineering, mixing, mastering, whatever, or producing my own music. That stuff kind of had to go on hold for a while. Um, but now that I'm back in action, there is actually a sale that I'm putting on for all audio engineering services. And this goes until the end of summer, not technically summer, until August 31st of this year. When you go into the shop area, you can see there's the different categories of services that I provide. One of them, which I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more into, is the educational services that I do. So I do offer one-to-one training. It is 50 Canadian dollars per hour of training, and that can be training of any kind. That can be training on Cubase, that can be training on mixing or mastering, could be on production techniques, can be Cubase, could be Bitwig. Then I also have this section here, which is more specific. This is a mixing feedback package, which is, I find, a very, very handy tool that I could have used years ago, which is you go ahead, you do all your mixing that you do on a song, you send me that project, preferably in a Cubase or Bitwig or Ableton session.